It's Good Morning Nigeria. We'll be dealing with 20 years of democracy, the role and highs and lows of the National Assembly.
All right, this background report you're about to watch is on the National Assembly in the last 20 years, and it is put together by Kunle Adeye.
Having witnessed several disruptions, the legislative arm of government returned in 1999 when the military handed over power to civilian administration. After 2 decades of legislative activities, it is time to appraise what has transpired in the 2 chambers of the National Assembly. Both chambers have gone through what could be described as the good, the bad, and the ugly. Many say the takeoff of the National Assembly at different times has been characterized by leadership tussle, which created friction among members. Eventually, these issues were resolved to pave way for legislative business. In the course of this legislative assignment, the Senate has produced 7 Senate presidents. They include Evans Enwerem, Chuba Okadigbo, Ayim Pius Ayim, Adolphus Wabara, Ken Nnamani, David Mark, and Bukola Saraki. The House of Representatives has also had 7 speakers. Salisu Buhari, who emerged the speaker in 1999, was replaced by Gali Umaru Naaba. Aminu Bello Masari presided over the House between 2003 and 2007. The only female speaker, Olubumi Ete and Dimeji Bankole, were speakers between 2007 and 2011, while Aminu Waziri Tambuwal presided over between 2011 and 2015. Yakubu Dogara was elected the Speaker of the 8th House from 2015 to 2019. The primary functions of the legislators is to act as checks on the excesses of the executive and make laws for the well-being of the citizens. In the area of bills, the 2 legislative chambers have passed a lot of bills aimed at improving the lives of Nigerians. There have also been constitutional amendments to strengthen the nation's institutions. In the area of oversight, the legislature in the last 20 years has undertaken this task with a lot of vigor, putting the executive on their toes. However, there have been criticism that this task could have been done better with more results. The public perception about the national legislators has not been encouraging due to allegations of huge allowances that are said to be shrouded in secrecy. There are also allegations of corrupt practices. With the 8th National Assembly wrapping up, there are many questions to raise on the role that the federal legislature has played in sustaining the nation's legislative culture. As it is often said, without the legislature, no society can boast of democracy. The question is, how well have legislators represented Nigerians in the past 20 years of its democracy? These and other questions will be answered by guests on Good Morning Nigeria shortly.
All right, thank you very much, Kunle Adeye, there for that backgrounder. And just to remind our viewers, Kirian, you recall we said this while we're introducing to this program, that our focus today is on the National Assembly and 20 years of democracy, and that we are not ignoring the fact that we have 36 state houses of assembly, and in states where the local government system is running, you also have the legislature in those localities. But our focus today has to do with legislature and 20 years of our democracy, legislature in this case representing the Federal National Assembly. We have guests already in the studios, as our correspondent indicated, and they will be taking on this subject matter. Let's welcome distinguished Senator Alius Sabi Abdullahi, is chairman of the Senate Committee on Media and Publicity. Distinguished Senator, a pleasure to have you with us on the program this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Also here with us in the studios, we have Honorable Abdul Razak Namdas. Abdul Razak Namdas is the opposite number. He is the chairman of the House Committee on Media and Public Affairs.
All right, now,
pleasure to have you with us. Shall we say outgoing? I think that would be outgoing until Saturday.
All right, we have in the studio a peer. He's a legislative analyst and, of course, the executive director, Order Paper Nigeria. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you, Karian.
All right, and with us all the way from Nasarawa State University is Professor Maxwell Gidadu, Professor of Constitutional Law. Prof, it's good to have you this morning.
A pleasure.
Yeah, gentlemen, you're welcome.
All right, Professor Gidad, of course, is also a learned senior advocate of Nigeria. Well, gentlemen, 20 years, and I mean, it's the longest that we've had. Legislators will always complain that whenever there was disruption of a republic, disruption and therefore overthrow of a republic, it was the legislature that was most impacted. Usually, you'll have the executive and the judiciary still functioning, but the executive will fuse the powers of the legislature. Here we are marking 2 decades of unbroken democratic governance with the legislature in place. What's your assessment? Let's begin with Senator Sabi Abdullahi.
Well, good morning, viewers. Thank you very much for having me. I think from what you have said, the truth is that when you remove the legislature, I think you look for another name for that government, but not democracy, definitely. Because you can liken the legislature as the brain box of a car, for example. And if you remove the brain box, of course, the car remains there. It becomes dysfunctional. So I think it is true, and it is actually a fact that the legislature is the heartbeat, is that arm of government that makes democracy vibrant, that makes democracy possible. And if you look at the Nigerian Constitution, the role given to the legislature is very clear. Lawmaking, oversight, representation. And if you assess how far we have gone on this front, I think that is where you can now situate how well the legislature has performed. And it is, I think kudos to Nigerians and even the watchdog of, our democratic movement. Here you're talking about the press, the civil society, and the like, who have remained very resolute in looking at those nuances that threaten democracy in any form and try to bring it up as, a topical issue to be looked at. And I think so far so good. We have done very well. Of course, because of this also, it also means that the institutional memory of the legislative arm has suffered the most in our governance. And to that extent, I think you can now, see the extent to which we must commend the legislature in holding forth from beginning when this Fourth Republic started. For example, after so long, with so many things not there. In fact, most of the people who found themselves in the National Assembly in 1999 had never experienced, any legislative function. Yeah, there are quite a couple of people, but what is the level of corporate memory that was available at the beginning? And so from that moment to now, a lot has happened, a lot has been built, and I think it is kudos also to Nigerians, like I said earlier, that we're able to get this far. And I'm convinced as we move on, we are definitely going to begin to learn from the lessons of our errors and mistakes and build upon it. And I think the 8th Senate, of which I'm privileged to be a part of, has done tremendously well with respect to looking at the past and then learning from those past and trying their best to improve on where we are, at least when you assess them on the basis of these areas of mandate or functions given to them by the Constitution.
All right.
Interesting. Kingsley, at the opening comment that we made, there was a reference to the fact that Nigerians within the last 20 years witnessed the good, the bad, and the ugly with respect to legislative arm of government. Well, it is believed or known the world over that the legislature is very prominent and paramount when it comes to democratic dispensation. And Nigerians have seen it all between 1999 and the year 2019. And I'd like the Honorable Abdul Razak Namdas, who is also a key player in the National Assembly, to give us his own assessment of what transpired right from the OBJ administration to the present dispensation.
Well, thank you so much. Good morning, viewers. I think my colleague actually captured the situation. I will only add that we are so grateful that between 1999 to this moment, we have had an uninterrupted transition between civilian to civilian administration, and that is why we are celebrating the 20 years of democracy and existence of the National Assembly. Because if it were interrupted, we should be talking about a different topic at the moment. But the good thing is that as we grow and we keep maturing with time, for instance, during the OBJ period, even though the institution of legislatures was still growing, you could see how the number of presiding officers were always being removed, impeached. At one point, you have more than 5 or 4 of them, Senate presidents changing as if it is a yearly thing. But if you can look at it now, we have started stabilizing. Look at the 8 Senate and the 8 House of Reps, or let me say the 8 National Assembly. It's probably the fact that the leadership came with some kind of turbulence. At least we didn't change our leaders. We ended up successfully. And thank God that I am still going to be part of the 9th Assembly. We will also ensure that we try to improve on what happened in the 8th. And I must say that in terms of productivity, if you look at the history of the National Assembly, the second assembly is better than the first. The third is better than the second. The fourth is better than. So even the 8th is better than the 7th. And I am hoping that we should have a better 9th National Assembly than the 8th. The kind of number of these motions, petitions that we have churned out, investigative hearings that we've been able to conduct, oversight functions, they have been credible. And I think we have done quite well. We will improve. We have a little lapses. The criticisms from individuals, academicians, NGOs, and what have you, and we take those in good faith. We improve in the 9th Assembly.
All right, Honorable Namdas, thank you very much. Let's bring in now Professor Maxwell Gidado, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, who, by the way, also, because of his academic work, spent a sabbatical period, that's 1 year, at the National Assembly. Professor Gidado, what's your assessment of the National Assembly 2 decades on?
Yes, thank you very much, viewers. Now, the first thing I would want to say is that the Fourth Republic and the experience that Nigerians went through, particularly with the workings of the legislature, has proven that Nigerians love democracy. And this comes to play when you see the way they troop out after every 4 years to vote their representatives to come to the National Assembly, state assemblies, to represent them. So, and as far as the assessment of the legislature is concerned, what I've seen is that the legislature has proven to be the bulwark of the democratic experience in Nigeria. And particularly when one looks at the fact that it is the most misunderstood arm of government, it is the most stunted arm of government, but without it, there's no democracy. As far as the legislature is concerned, it is the glue, that holds the other 2 arms of government. So, and if one looks at the kinds of bills and the experiences this, particularly the National Assembly, has gone through, you will discover that it has helped tremendously in the growth of democracy in Nigeria. Each assembly comes with challenges, no doubt about that. But if I would rate the 8th assembly, I would take it as one that has exhibited that act of maintaining its independence. Because in a democracy, the 3 arms are supposed to be independent and get about its activity without any hindrance or without any interference. And the legislature had been on this very aspect of trying to be independent ab initio, particularly going by the provisions of Section 50 that tells them or makes them to elect amongst themselves their principal officers. By the time you allow the executive or any other arm to dictate, to them as to how to get about their leadership, then you are definitely going against the principle of separation of powers. Because as propounded by the founding father of separation of powers, they are supposed to be distinct, separate, and independent. But when there's an interference and the assembly toes that line, then that gives a very big challenge to the workings of the National Assembly. And when you look at the bills that were passed by the 8th Assembly, these are bills that you could describe as, some of them are pro-masses. A typical one that comes to mind is the law or the bill to amend the Electoral Act. Now, with elections, periodical elections, as a mechanism where electorates will vote in both the executive and the legislature, any amendment that will smoothen this exercise is a welcome development and is pro-masses. If you also look at the petroleum industry bill, still under this 8th Assembly, and you look at also the Northeast Development Bill, which looked at a section of the country that has been devastated because of the insecurity in the nation brought about by Boko Haram. And if a legislature tries to reflect and assist towards ameliorating the sufferings of a particular people, you can describe such a legislation as pro-masses. So you can go on and on. As far as when you look at even in terms of number, they have passed the largest number or the highest number of bills, running to about 318. That's Senate. And the House of Reps, about 389, as opposed to the 7th Assembly that passed only 219. Sorry, the 8th Assembly, 219. So when you look at the totality of the bills, as well as the petitions and the motions that were moved, you would get to know that there is some improvement that goes along with each assembly, and that should be encouraged. That is what we would want to see in a typical democracy, where the independence of the legislature will be brought to bear in their own exercise, such that there is that element of doctrine of separation of powers being implemented both by the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, standing and looking at aspects that if there will be any conflict coming out of these two, they will intervene and interpret for the interest of the democratic movement.
All right. Well explained, if you ask me. And starting from 1999, as Namdas pointed out, that there were initial hiccups, at the National Assembly, and that also lasted for over 8 years. And we are talking about a learning process here, which our friends in the National Assembly will say, look, that we are learning. But I do believe, quite frankly, that any child that is up to 20 years, is now a man. And many Nigerians have observed the National Assembly with key interest since 1999. And that's why I will bring in a peer who I'm sure has been following activities of lawmaking and others at the National Assembly to give us another perspective to this assessment of this very, very important arm of government. So what's our own assessment of this very National Assembly of Nigeria, which of course has so many records of ups and downs, if you ask me?
Kieran, thank you. Congratulations to Nigerians, 20 years stretch of democracy. Kudos must be given to citizens for keeping faith. Critical question is, however, as the legislature kept faith with Nigerians, are lawmakers able to say that they have delivered on the expectations that Nigerians hold of them? And I think that in making an assessment of the National Assembly, of the legislature generally, that's the critical question that we must bear in mind. But for me, I would say that it's a stream of cheers and some jeers. and somewhere along the line, there is a learning curve, like you said. And the learning curve, I mean, it's never enough learning. 20 years, a child, an old man who is even 80 years could still be learning, so the learning curve continues, And we must underscore this learning curve with the kind of background that we have to democracy in 1999. The military, long years of military rule, and then the presidency, 1999, 2007. The president, is a former military man, a general, So you see that military complex that it became a throw-in into the first 8 years of democracy and continues to some extent to be noticed in how the legislature and executive have operated. So for me, I would see that why there's some shares to make, some gears to call attention to. I think the greater challenge is what I call, there's the challenge of what I call democratization of dissent and politics of accommodation, given the background that I have just given. Because the kind of people who were elected to operate democracy, in return in 1999, were those who saw dissent, who had a temperament not given to dissent. And so that affected the way the legislature operated. So you saw a legislature that was thrown into suddenly a learning curve, like the senator said, no institutional memory. Everything was like from the beginning, from the start, and then they were faced with an executive arm of government that was not much given to dissent. We have it my way or the highway, and that's accounted for much of the, very fractious relationship you saw between the executive and the legislature, with the change of leadership, 5 Senate presidents in the first, the fourth assembly, I think, all of that. So we must not fail to bring that up in assessing the legislature. So it's like a baby who is learning and impeded by the forces of the environment around it. But be that as it may, I think that the legislature needs to critically examine itself whether it has lived up to expectations. And for me, I think that it's too early to chest thump, as it appears to be the case from earlier speakers, because there's a whole lot that needs to be done. There's a whole lot that is expected from the conduct and performance of legislators and the legislative institutions. They have done quite a lot. I mean, but there's a whole lot, given the expectations, the huge expectations indeed, when Nigeria got back democracy in 1999, that needs to be mirrored, with respect to how far we have come. So I think that the jury is still out. I think that there is still a greater burden on the legislature and the legislators to be more critical, to be more reflective in their thoughts and in their conduct, and in discharging the performance of their duties to Nigerians. And I think that going forward, this should define the National Assembly. I'm happy with the kind of comments I saw yesterday at the valedictory session. There were some very frank comments from legislators. Senator Adeye, for instance, raised issues, about quorum, about punctuality, what you would think are minor issues that should be taken for granted after 20 years. You see the legislators sit and there's so much absenteeism. For example, when bills are passed, at the committee of the whole, sometimes there are live sessions on NTA. You see how many you can count with your fingertips, how many legislators are there. At that very critical stage of passing a bill, because that's the final stage of passing a bill, there are no legislators seated. So, I mean, I know that there are other functions. There are representative functions. They need to go on oversight. But there are some critical, especially when it has to do with the optics that people see. These are things that determine whether or not they believe that their functions are creditably being delivered upon.
All right. Okay, Pierre, thank you very much there for your opening salvo. Let's bring in the other guests again. First, Senator Aliu Sabi Abdullahi. Now, in drafting the history of the National Assembly in the first 20 years of Fourth Republic, what, in your opinion, will be the milestones?
Well, first, I think before I go straight into this, permit me, based on some of the comments made, to clarify one or two things. You see, we need to, in actually looking at the legislature, we must also be fair on one point. Is it the same set of people from 1999 to date? The obvious answer is clear to us. If you look at the rate of turnover because of that same learning curve, the turnover rate is too high. And so up to this very moment, one of the things the legislature is still battling with is the same issue of corporate memory I talked about earlier, in such a manner that the level of the number of people who will be available to provide a guide going forward is so reduced that sometimes certain things are even missed. And so I think in looking at it, we must begin to understand that our democracy is still evolving. There are places where, for example, there is this deep-rooted zoning. Somebody will tell you, I can't go for more than 2 terms. Some people is even 1 term. There are constituencies that is only 1 term. Nobody has ever gone 2. So these are also nuances that we must, take note of as a critical challenge for this particular institution. Because, of course, people who have experience, the moment they are in a place, they are able to provide better guidance. They know where the pitfalls are, and they can guide so that you can actually fast-track the rate at which. And I think what we have done right now is we are trying as much as possible to improve on documentation so that people can have references which have not been there before. So having said this, first let me say that as a milestone, I think we need to situate the legislature within the context of have they risen up to national challenges. I think the legislature have risen up to some national challenges. The 3rd term agenda is one key milestone the legislature was able to score. The second one was the issue of the doctrine of necessity, where we almost had a very serious national crisis. So these two are critical. And if you also look at it, even in the fight against corruption, I think the legislature it cannot be taken away in the milestone, because the EFCC Act and the ICPC were all creations of the National Assembly. And if you look at what is also happening, for example, in the 8th Senate, the NFIU Act was a major keystone. What Nigerians may not know is that, but for that intervention, those holding MasterCard, Visa, and all these things will not be able to operate, because Nigeria will have been suspended from the global financial system. So I think there are critical milestones that we've been able to score. And apart from that, there were a lot of investigative hearings that the National Assembly has been able to rise up to the occasion, to stand its feet and expose, in line with the provisions of the Constitution that says expose corruption, inefficiencies, and waste in government. I think the journalists have said, sorry, I can't.
Okay,
yes.
Yes.
Like he said, there are quite a lot of work to be done. But my joy here is the fact that I think based on the 20 years we've had going forward, we seem to be having a traction in building gradual, incremental progress. And I think the more we begin to underscore the progress that is being made, the better we're able to attract people to see the need to want to join in that particular line of progress. So I think overall, these are my few take on this.
All right.
See, Kingsley, actually, the positive side of the National Assembly, which he has explained, is well understood. But the other aspect, which may include conduct of legislators, okay, Pierre mentioned the absenteeism. And of course, there are poor oversight function on the part of legislators. Let us be clear about how Nigerians feel. All right. Nigerians feel that what you mentioned earlier with respect to people who have garnered experience over the years to be able to adapt to the challenges of legislative works and what have you, that may not hold because where I come from, for instance, we've had a senator who's been there for 18 years or thereabout, right, and in so many other constituencies as well. So the thing here is about the behavioral pattern of the persons who have been elected to represent their people at the National Assembly. We are talking about 9th Assembly now, which means we have had 8 of them in the past. And you discover that what happened in the 5th or 6th will reoccur in the 7th, and again in the 8th Assembly, and perhaps in the 9th, as case may be. So what we're saying is, when will there be a time when legislators will understand? I'm sure most of them are are educated to this reasonable level, right? To understand that this is a regulation. We have regulations guiding what we're doing. Why don't we adhere to that? So it's all part of the, the reasons why many Nigerians are not at home with the manner and way the visitors conduct themselves. And I'd like Namdas to come in here. What are those, pitfalls, as we may pick up, within this period we're talking about, from 1999 to 2019?
Well, thank you so much. Let me say that so much people, analysts, and or the media always talked about, for example, absenteeism in the National Assembly. He pointed out in the Committee of the Whole, that is true, that the critical lawmaking function is when you are doing the aspect of, let's say, finalizing the law by Committee of the Whole, considering the reports and what have you. You sometimes see the population not quite encouraging. But that is not all the time. Let me give an example. When you just come out from an election, in the APC, I will be very clear here. Out of the 223 of us in the APC alone, only 62 of us returned. The whole of the National Assembly, 62 returned. Now you find that the majority are not back. That was why he mentioned about the rate of attrition. So for those who didn't come back, sometimes at this critical period, they are always not in the assembly. Because some of them have lost out, they are trying to take other professions and what have you. But in the beginning,
to lick their wounds as well.
in the beginning, it is not like that. When you, like, if we inaugurate this assembly on the 11th, but especially in the next 3 years, you find out that the attendance is quite encouraging. So it's not all the time that you see this kind of scenario. And my point again on oversight functioning is that, or even the absenteeism, as he knows, as a legislator, when you are not in the plenary, you are excused, for example, if you are having an oversight function somewhere. It is still a legislative business. Or if you are in your constituency doing the job of representation, it is still a legislative job. But people just look at the hallowed chamber. Once you are not there, it means you are not just there. But that's not true. Again, the issue of oversight function, we are supposed to go out on oversight function to see what is actually happening. But again, the perception also matters. I think it's important for Nigerians to know that if I go on an oversight function, I'm doing my core legislative duties. But most critics will say, you see this National Assembly has come, you go to ministry, they are coming for money. I mean, it's embarrassing that this is not the only job I've done in my life. I have done other functions before coming here. It's unfair for you to always believe that when somebody comes as a chairman on information, I come to NTA because government has appropriated funds here. Let me see the judicial use of this fund. And the moment I set my foot in NTA, you begin to scamper that, look, these men are coming in for money. We have had cases where the likes of Jega came out and say, committee chairmen are busy asking for money. And I responded as a spokesman of the House. I said, well, it's unfair. Reason being that if you are a chief executive at this particular time, well in office, and a legislator or a chairman of a committee comes to you seeking for money, being a man of integrity, what you do is to expose that particular person right there and then. You don't wait after you leave office and until when you are called upon to write books or present papers that you begin to tell Nigerians your memory, your encounter. It does not even help the system. So if we expose these corrupt activities, legislators on their own will begin to know that, look, but we have to do the right thing. But I can tell you that nobody goes to any function with the sole aim of making money, because it's not a making money business. We have the media, we have EFCC, the ICPC, and even the man in charge to expose corruption. So I think we've been doing...
Numbers, are you speaking for yourself or for the entire members of the National Assembly? Because what Jega said has also been said by chief executives of certain parastatals.
What I'm listening to what I'm saying, if you say X has demanded for money, what I'm saying, what did you do at the time that thing happened? Because you are also complicit. For you to wait until I get out of office, and then your village people call you to come and present a paper, and then you begin to say this matter, you have not helped the system. So what we are saying is that this thing is not a one-man thing. We live within a society. I'm not saying we're 100% perfect, But where there are issues like this, expose the corruption, but don't wait and always heap blames. I'm not saying you, as you expose, Nigeria will be even very happy with you that you have done so.
Honorable Namdas, in addition to or different from what Senator Sabi Abdullahi said with regard to the milestones of the National Assembly in the last 20 years, what are your own contributions?
Yes, let me give an example. When you come to budget activities in the National Assembly, the Constitution says, look, that the budget will be laid in the joint sitting of the National Assembly. Now, when you lay the budget, it is our duty now to turn it into a bill and work on this. Now, but because the Head Assembly, for instance, created a milestone by saying, okay, we are going to do an we are going to do public hearing. And this public hearing is the creation of the 8th Assembly. Because by our job, by our nature of our operations, we are not supposed to even call for any public hearing. Because we've been elected by you to come and represent, I should represent you in Abuja. So whatever decision I take is on your behalf. But because of the way Nigerians are not comfortable sometimes the way the budget is being done, they feel there is problems here. We say, okay, let us invite experts in budget matters, academicians, civil society organizations to come and give us their own input. And then we add to the one we have, then it becomes the people's budget. But even when you pass this budget, after going through all the oversight function, sometimes you still hear, well, it's a milestone as far as I'm concerned. And again, the PIB bill he was talking about, the PIB bill was an initiative of the National Assembly. It didn't come from the executive. It should have come from the executive, but it was the National Assembly itself that came up with the PIB bill. And finally, sir, the 8th Assembly was able to do constitutional alteration. At least now, we have altered the Constitution. We have been able to bring in the not too young to run bill. Look at even the minimum wage that people talked about. The proposal from the executive is 27,000. It is the National Assembly that upped it to 30,000. It's also a milestone, in my opinion.
Well, talking about milestone, very understandable. But I'd like Professor Gidadu to come in here. The aspect of budgeting, which Honorable Namdas raised now, I recall that the 2018 budget took about 6 months at the National Assembly for it to be passed. And the executive, at the same time, accused the National Assembly of budget padding. We had it for the very first time, in the last dispensation. And now the question to be asked is, what could have led to 6 months delay in passing the budget at the National Assembly, whereas it is believed that there is a section of the National Assembly that works with the executive, ab initio, when the budget is being articulated. Right. Please educate us here on the issue of these delays. Is it a healthy development? Because it has continued since 1999. We've never had January to December budget cycle in this country. What's the problem?
Yes, Kirian, let me tell you, I just want to state that if there's a challenge that the legislative experience over these 20 years has had, and which there had been no improvement, is on this issue of late passage of budget. Now, the previous assemblies have tried right up to the 8th. I just hope the 9th will get it right. Because the executive, try as they might, would present the budget or the appropriation bill by November, December, sometimes October. Now, I can see the examples or the reasons they always give that would make them stretch it up to March or even April or even June, of the following year before such a budget is sent to the president for assent. That does not speak well. And I think the major problem is the fact that the executive doesn't sit with the legislature before bringing this bill to the National Assembly. If they do, if there's that synergy, let it not even be with it should just be with the leadership. if you get members of the leadership of the National Assembly or those who actually work on the committees on budget, you sit down with the executive, the ministers, the MDAs, executive representatives, and you propose bills relating to an appropriation that you are taking to the House. If they are carried along, in other words, if they are aware of what you are bringing in, and they chip in, like this aspect of the minimum wage, or numbers mentioned, if the executive proposed 27 and members of the legislature were there with them, and they also chip in why it should be 30, then there will be no need for any debate when it comes to the National Assembly. Or even if there will be, it will just be minimal, and it will be time consuming. But where you don't carry them along, and it's their constitutional right for oversighting this, you don't just, they're not rubber stamps. You don't just bring an amount and you expect them to just pass down the bill within a very short period of 2 weeks. But they need time to study and also invite experts, like through the public hearing.
Up to 6 months?
No, it shouldn't be up to 6 months, definitely. But as I said, if it will minimize this period of their dragging it to this very 6 or 5 months, if there's that synergy where they sit and agree or harmonize or minimize areas of conflict, areas where they differ in terms of, I mean, even if it's pegging like the amount of money or the amount of naira to a dollar that the budget is being premised on. These are things that could have been taken up in issue and not just debated on the floor when it gets to the National Assembly.
Yeah, Professor,
so I believe this is where they've been having it, wrong.
Yeah, Professor Maxwell Gidado, still on the issue of appropriation, the view has often been expressed that perhaps the most important power that the legislature has is that of appropriation. But in 20 years of the Fourth Republic, what remains unresolved is the extent of the power of appropriation. The yin and yang between the executive and the legislature over the enlargement, usually, of the size of the appropriation is one that continues. There also appears to be some reluctance in testing this issue in the courts. Why have we had this lingering issue? The executive proposes, say, 8 trillion. Legislature will take it to 8.5 or 9 trillion. And in the meantime, it's the executive that has a panoramic sweep or view of the sources of revenue.
If I can just come in. First, let's get one fact very clear. Why do we have a democracy? We have a democracy because we want everybody who is in that particular country to know that there is a government. Like the Constitution says, the primary purpose of government is the security and the welfare of the citizens. And I think arising from this, we have federal constituencies and senatorial districts so that we create a balance in a manner that, like the Constitution says, every segment of this country will have a sense of belonging in terms of the resources of this country and how these resources are going to be spent. Here we are, there are parts of this country today that for the past 30 years have never seen one federal budget. But today, if you look at the aspect of our democracy, through the instrument of, for example, the constituency project that some people tend to condemn, they are able to get 1 or 2 federal projects. So to come back to what Prof said, you see, the budget process, if the executive that is supposed to implement carries the representative of the people who are very vast and aware of the needs of the people, because we go to campaign and we go around to meet people, give me your vote so that I can represent you. And in doing so, they will say, well, our basic problem is water, our basic problem is this road, our basic problem is we don't have electricity, our basic problem is we don't have classrooms. And then the key instrument, which is the national budget, that is supposed to now release resources for this to happen. And you as a representative, you don't even have any insight into what is coming. Then you now fold your arms. How do you go back to meet your people? So I think this is where the whole issue starts. And like I will always maintain, I was in the executive side. I worked as a civil servant, and I was involved in budget and planning. And I will tell you today, there are directors that are able to commandeer projects to their own place at the detriment of other people. The Constitution is very clear. Section 2, that is the directive principles of state policy. Chapter 2. It says very clearly, all those who are holding legislative, judicial, or executive powers are to imbibe the principle enshrined in that particular section. And it says that in doing so, if you are going to share your project, you must carry every segment along. So the point to ask here is, when this budget is brought, I'm representing Niger North. My interest is, I want to see the trunk A road, for example, that cuts across my senatorial district. What is the current status? And what is government doing to address it? I think if we deny the legislators that, then it is not the legislators, it is the people who are the key drivers of our democracy that have been denied. So I agree that, yes, it's too long, but I want to assure you, we also are concerned because we believe the budget process can be finished within 3 months. If the executive will bring in their submission at a particular given time, and then we have a calendar. And I think in this night's assembly, under the instruments of the leadership Senator Ahmed Lawal is pursuing, we as a group, we've agreed that we want a change in this direction. And Senator Ahmed Lawal, for example, is proposing that we'll work together with the executive to have an agreed calendar jointly to say, for example, by September, come and give us your proposal. We'll go into the next line of actions. And during this period, all chief executives must be prevented from traveling. Because one of the challenges, let me land on this. One of the challenges we are facing is when it comes to the budget cycle, the committees, when they call for budget defense, some of the chief executives and even ministers are not available to come and defend their budget. So I think these are critical issues that we must look at so that at the end of the day, and that is where I agree with Prof, that the element of engagement and participation at the level of conceptualization and preparing budget is key. And where that happens, you will see that you are reducing the level of altercation that may happen.
All right.
I just wanted to, before he comes in, sorry, just to let me not lose memory of what he's saying. Professor Maxwell Gidedo is one of our consultants in the National Assembly as far as the constitutional amendment is concerned. I am also a member of the Constitutional Review Committee in the House of Representatives. He is quite aware that we amended a section of the Constitution to say, look, the president should lay the budget 3 months, let's say in September, 3 months before the end of the year. We have passed that. It is already on the table of the president. If the executive had assented to this, then it is going to be binding on the executive that they must present this budget 3 months earlier before the end of the year. And that probably we were doing it with the hope that we can get back to the January, December thing. But I can tell you that you always see budgets being presented in December. And yet, what comes to the mind is not the presentation, is the passing. I think once the executive will have done their own side, but the needful, we wouldn't have gone through this
Honorable
process.
Namdas, thank you very much. Okay, Pierre, I mean, this is a matter that's come up fairly frequently. Some persons would have argued, look, why do you need that constitutional provision? Already you have the Fiscal Responsibility Act, under which MTEF ought to be presented. MTEF comes first, and thereafter, the appropriation bill. And MTEF, of course, has its time lag before the end of, yes, the fiscal strategy paper, before you get to the end of the financial year. But in addition to this challenge of getting the budget passed timeously, there is also the issue of the allocative powers of the legislature. Distinguished Senator Abdullahi Sapi has already mentioned why they think that they have to intervene. That matter remains unresolved. Do you think that this is one matter that we can overcome, considering also what may be the mindset of the executive, that it is not necessarily the president himself, or for that matter, the Minister of Budget and National Planning, as it was known, up until the 28th of May, that is doing that, but that you actually have civil servants, the bureaucracy, who prepared the groundwork, and in the meantime, are self-dealing. So is this something that we can overcome so that the fight at the arms of government, the top of the arms of government, can be reduced, and then the economy, it will have the benefit of early passage and speedy implementation?
I think that there's been a lot of lack of sincerity on the budgetary process from both sides of the divide. The law is clear. You have made the point about the Fiscal Responsibility Act. This administration, to the best of my knowledge, has not at any point in time complied with the submission of the MTEP and the budget bill timelessly, respect to the timelines given. The Act says, for instance, that the MTF needs to be submitted, or to be submitted by the second quarter, by the end of the second quarter. Then the budget comes in, I think, by the third quarter, around September. But we have seen the budget submitted not later than November in this administration. So, like Honorable Namdi said, there's a flip side to it. There's the side about budget submission. There's also the side about the budget passage. And Nigerians should not lose this perspective. Unfortunately, they lose it because the legislature has come to, pick up this very bad image of itself, and, it is not doing much, quite a lot, really, to change the narrative, And this is why I come in on respect to the sincerity issue. The distinguished senator made the point about what they want to do in the Ninth Assembly. I think they've had the opportunity to do that in the 8th Assembly. Senator Olawan, for instance, is the majority leader of the Senate, and as the chief interface officer between the Senate and the executive, I mean, we are not aware that he has come out to say that there have been issues with respect to getting the executive to submit the budget and the MTF as required by law. What efforts have the legislature made to ensure that the law as required on the budgetary process is adhered to? If the legislature is not able to communicate to Nigerians or convince Nigerians that these are the setbacks that we face in getting the executive to comply with the laws of the country, then there is a problem. And so there is this thing about, okay, whose interest is it that we are serving? Is it the interest of the citizens, or is it the interest of the legislature, legislators, or the executive and the officials in the presidency? Like he also said, some directors are powerful enough to commandeer projects to their own localities. And, senators who are empowered, elected to deliver democracy dividends to their constituents are left dry and high. That should not be so. But it should not also be so that senators and members of the House of Reps should insist on having projects that are better, within the purview of local councils and state governments to insist on such projects being on the national budget. And I think that's where the issue of constituency projects has been most controversial. There needs to be that agreement. There needs to be that conversation, very sincere conversation around what kind of projects we want to see on the federal budget. Yes, your people need borehole. It's your duty to provide boreholes for your people. What's the local council doing? What's the state government doing? Must we bring such boreholes to the national budget? So these are the questions. We need to agree on these parameters. And until we have that agreement, these contentions are not likely to go away. And there will be this papering over these disagreements in the name of politics and family affair. And at the end of the day, Nigerians continue to suffer. So it's more about sincerity of purpose. So what do we want to do? Do we want the budget to really work? If we want the budget to work, we apply the laws. If we do not apply the laws, we apply sanctions. There are sanctions. There's consequence for bad behavior. Okay, so if we do not want to go to that extreme, then let's judge or let's sit down. Like I said in my opening statement, this is all about, the challenge to democratization of dissent and, the politics of accommodation. If we do not think that other people have a right to dissent to your position, then there's a problem. If you do not think that you have a way to accommodate their own positions, then there's a problem. We must be able to marry both of these, tendencies together to make the budget work for the citizens of Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much indeed. I pick one word or two there, sincerity of purpose. And that's why we have a diverse argument with respect to what the executive referred to as budget padding, and what our distinguished senator has described as a way of ensuring that the people he's representing get something from the federal government. But Oke made a good point here, which has to do with the fact that we have state government. We also have state national and state houses of assembly. And these houses of assembly members are also responsible for their people, especially areas where you also come from at the federal level. And if we have to wait for every member of National Assembly to have a project for his constituency, then a budget may never be passed for a year, if that is the case. So I think from what Oke said, it's very apt. There has to be sincere purpose. Sit down and talk it over. Do you have the power to allocate funds as a member of National Assembly? Who has the power to allocate funds as Kingsley asked?
Yeah.
Is it the executive
Enlarge.
or the legislature?
Enlarge the proposal.
You're not coming in here.
Yeah.
We're just doing a
short
summary.
break. Yes,
A summary. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll move into other perspectives of this conversation.
Including taking the tweets from our viewers.
Exactly. So stay tuned. You are watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, and let's go straight to the tweets. Many Nigerians have been reacting to our conversation this morning, so let's take the tweets. Kingsley?
All right, we have this one from Titus Monday Knock. It says, that's to say the lawmakers now at the national level, their take-home pay and allowances are so outrageous that people fight to death just to get there without making any impact on national issues.
Okay, Shaibu Al-Khali, 20 years of legislative activities in Nigeria was very poor in terms of everything. We wish the 9th Assembly will work for Nigerians, not for themselves. Welcome to the next level.
Festus Akimboyewa, the legislature plays an effective role in the functioning of democratic governance through lawmaking, scrutiny of expenditure and policies of the government. Sadly, the past 20 years of legislative activities have been below par. Time for a change.
All right, Akeju Alabaju, the 9th Assembly should focus more on laws of overall national interest. As federal lawmaker, they should be less concerned on motions that are localized within constituencies. It is wasteful in real time and space. Such should be for state or local legislators.
Dele Jack Solomon, over the years, there has never been a harmonious relationship between the executive and the legislature. And as such, it has hampered the delivery of dividends of democracy to Nigerians. The two arms of government should learn to work together for the well-being of the country.
All right, Mike Ayako, this one is totally out of place, you know. But no, we're not going to skip it, Kingsley. He's addressing to you. He says, Kingsley, I sincerely wish that a good number of you guys at the NTA Good Morning Nigeria get political appointments in the presidency because of the good stuff you people are made of. Bravo. Thank you very much indeed for appreciating us. I mean, we are doing our job, right?
Well, absolutely. Thank you very much, Mike Ayako. We hope that our viewers will continue to tune in at home and abroad. Shakiru has the next tweet. 20 years of legislative activities in Nigeria had advantages and benefits. This is due to the sustenance of the country's democracy. Each assembly has tried its best for the country's growth.
Now, Mutana Farouk, 20 years of legislative activities in Nigeria could be averagely described as a democratic dividend of Komisomeka. I don't know what it means. Perhaps it means that Nigeria needs more robust activities.
What is saying the democracy, as a democratic dividend of Komsi Komsa.
Komsi.
Yeah, but unfortunately the spelling there is
wrong. Yes, okay. So that's from Mutana Farouk.
Sani Michael Amakoji, one of our regulars. The beauty of democracy is that no arm of government is a rubber stamp. But a situation where that is done out of hatred to frustrate governance is unacceptable. The 9th Assembly must learn from the past and make amends where necessary.
Dele Jack Solomon, democracy can only be sustained when legislators have the will, ability, and information to make decisions that reflect the interests and needs of the society. Also, the governed must have the will, ability, and information to transmit their needs and interests to their legislators and to evaluate the performance of the legislators or sanction their actions. Unfortunately, in our context, reverse is the case. Our legislators are most known for collecting huge salaries and bonuses and sleeping on duty, while the people have failed to hold them accountable.
Well, I doubt if we have instances of lawmakers sleeping in the chambers now. Frank Olize, of course, who was a colleague here at NTA, had some good shots there from the Second Republic, where the National Assembly was based in Lagos. You could see federal lawmakers.
Did you monitor the deliberations lately? Have you monitored the deliberations lately?
I haven't lately, I must admit. But if they are still sleeping, then Senator Sabi and Honorable Namdas will tell us why they are not serving their colleagues coffee so that they can stay awake. Now, this is coming from Musa Hadeja. He said, I hope that the incoming legislators will make robust legislation their priority, coupled with constant visit to their constituencies.
Mutana Farouk, laws are political architectures that shape the political and the social economic activities of a nation. Therefore, the legislative job should not be left alone in the hands of politicians who cannot obey the laws they enacted. Bicameral legislature is just a basket for saving water.
All right. Chris Simeon tweets. It says, the Nigerian legislature is under tremendous influence. For instance, the passage of bills is always sluggish, and this takes a pretty long while.
Now, Law Alpha, the legislature for the 20 years had in their midst seasoned and experienced lawmakers, with majority of them that are there to serve themselves. No thanks to the volume of remunerations they corner for themselves.
Akejo Olagbaju again. We're looking forward to when our political system will evolve and have more career politicians. A career politician is committed to legislative functions and duties and earns salaries and moderate allowances. I know we will attain the level in the interest of our democracy.
First, just like the level of knowledge and expertise in our legislature is low. That's why there are many drafting errors in the bills they sent to the president for assent. This needs to be addressed in the 9th Assembly.
All right. Mike Ayankwo tweets, we need a virile and robust legislature to deepen our democracy. The leadership of the legislature must be independent and always ensure that they pursue the people's agenda. They must not be confrontational with the executive. Absenteeism should attract severe reprimand. Those are the tweets that we are taking. Kirian, that's the point. We're getting pressed now. Professor Maxwell Gidado, while making his opening comment, did say that the legislature is one of the most misunderstood arms of government. What exactly do you mean? And in our instant case, in 20 years, what has been that level of misunderstanding?
Yes. Now, Kisley, what I made that statement of, or why I said it, is that, you see, when you trace the history of democracy in the country, from 1960, if we had had an uninterrupted democratic experience till date, we would have gotten it right by now. Most of the misconceptions that people have been having about the legislature would have at least been diminished. But the military interregnum comes and obliterates the legislature and leaves only the executive and the judiciary. So Nigerians are quite, familiar with the two arms without this first arm actually being on board until we now came to the Fourth Republic. So with the aspects of salaries, allowances, and some even are proposing that they should be part-time. They shouldn't be full-time. And some also look at the legislature as a retirement home for some governors. So you see, so many conjectures, so many pictures are being painted of the legislature. That was what made me to conclude that it is the most misunderstood. People just see it as a place, where, for instance, people go and collect humongous, sums of money as salaries and allowances and do nothing.
Prof, wouldn't you think also that Nigerians are even are having better understanding of legislature? Because, well, biblically speaking, by their fruits ye shall know them. And the people, you've listened to what people have been saying in the tweets this morning. These are views of individuals and perhaps majority of Nigerians who are not politicians. That's exactly their perspective when it comes to National Assembly matters, especially the humongous salary and the allowances that you have. Let me remind you this before you come in. When the President Kenyatta took over, in Kenya as president, within the first 3 months, the legislature, they just slashed their pay. Agreed. everybody agreed that it should be slashed, that it's on the high side. Today, Nigerian legislators are the highest paid globally. Please, you can correct the impression.
Before Senator Sabi comes, let's also get the views. Senator Sabi, let's get the views of Okepia on this. Is there a misunderstanding of the legislature in our democracy, 20 years? And has there also been a conflation of their duties? Because some of them, it is alleged, like to pose or compete with the executive. Then the people also approach them as though they were the executive.
Yes, there is a misunderstanding, but there is also little or no attempt or sustained attempt by the legislature and legislators themselves to mitigate that misunderstanding. So I talked about conduct earlier. They continually engage in conduct that exacerbates that misunderstanding. The issues of allowances and salaries, the issues of absenteeism, sometimes even truancy. I mean, there are senators, members of the House of Reps in this current expiring assembly, you could count the number of times they showed up in plenary. They were not doing any oversight. So this is about the things that they did or failed to do that reinforces this misunderstanding. There is a basic misunderstanding about the process of passage of bills and what the bills entails. So there needs to be some enlightenment and public education in those aspects. And I think at Other Paper we do quite a bit in that space. But with respect to conduct, that's where the challenge is. And you mentioned about, members of the legislature maybe conflating themselves with the executive. So, for instance, during campaigns, they say, we'll provide you this and that, and that's not their business. And they pretty much know it. But because they want to secure the votes, they will say those to the people so they can get the votes. And it becomes a challenge when they are in office to deliver on those promises. And that's why you see the issues around constituency projects become a quagmire, because they now have a challenge to ensure that those things feature in the budget. And the executive said, no, you can't have these things feature in the budget. And we are back to square one. So these are the issues. The National Assembly, going forward, must make it as an agenda to deliberately want to address this genuine misunderstanding and, be more purposeful and be more retrospective, be more transparent and accountable in its conduct. Salaries and allowances, the issues of, attendance, and contributions in plenary. Because Nigerians are getting to a point where there is a greater sense of accountability demand, and we cannot downplay that. It's showing up in the executive. It's going to catch up with the legislators. Nigerians want to know how many times you attend plenary. They want to know how many times, your name showed up in some scandal. If the House of Representatives, the current House of Representatives, for instance, had done something about some of the little bits of scandals that we have seen. Recently, the committee hearing, public procurements, PENCOM, there was a scandal. A member openly accused his colleague of, being a broker, trying to, and then nobody had anything about it. They said the leadership was going to look into the matter, and then it died. You see, if there was some transparency in addressing these issues, like they did in the 7th Assembly under Tambuwal and Hedia, the subsidy scam, the actors were, they were penalized. Farouk Lawan was suspended. The matter is still in court. So there should be that sense. Nigerians should want to perceive that action, that decisive action from the leadership and the legislators themselves to want to address this misunderstanding. Otherwise, it will fester.
Well, thank you very much. I think I quite agree with the submission. And the only point I would like to make here is that there is always this issue of we are the highest paid legislators. I'm not going to go into a bigger debate because we will need more time to dissect some of the issues. But what I want to say is, based on empirical evidence, that statement is not true. I'm a researcher, and I will tell you that I've seen research documents that clearly showed that this position is not correct. That is perhaps for another day. But let's look at it. Yes, I agree in terms of behavior. I'm somebody who likes discipline. I was a civil servant, and I believe in discipline. Now, I agree that, yes, there are some politicians who are carefree. They tend to take certain things on serious. And I think over time, if you look at our other, what do they call it, the rule book and other, what do they call it, books, you will see that clearly we are not unmindful of this. And that is why they are in our rule books, to say that don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. And I agree also that perhaps there is some laxity in terms of enforcement, even within ourselves. And I think that is a critical challenge going forward that the legislature must look for itself. But overall, let me say, honestly, the legislature still remains the most misunderstood arm of government.
Okay.
And the responsibility is not ours alone. The media and all other actors, they have a role there.
We'll stop you there because I'm not sure we have time for you to come because he has spoken on your behalf as the
Nanda.
maybe just 2 seconds.
Just 2
Oh,
seconds.
misunderstanding. Clarify the misunderstanding.
No, 2 seconds. is not enough.
Let me say that there are people, even the elites and the well-read, are not aware that in the National Assembly, the Public Complaint Commission is an agency under the National Assembly. The National Institute of Legislative Studies is an agency under the National Assembly. The National Assembly Budget Office, NABRO, is an agency under the National Assembly. Now, people believe that 469 people, if the budget is 115 billion, it is 115 divided by 469. That's not true. These are some of the misconceptions. How I wish I had time as a spokesman
no
to
time.
clarify for.
And we want to appreciate you.
After midnight on Saturday, you will not be a spokesman.
After leaving here.
All right, and one last one, not just a question, but a reference. When you go to states and see a member of National Assembly, on the move, perhaps attending a function, you see the kind of convoy, that he parades, and people look at that, and it's so people feel, look, if a National Assembly member can ride on about 7 or more cars going for a function, though of course there's a deal in their money making. Well, be honest, these are.
Is it in the kidnap areas? Or
No.
All right.
Now.
Even when you don't invite them, and you cannot stop it.
All right. But Kirian, in addition to that, just to say that we have had a guest on Good Morning Nigeria. It's a member of the House of Reps from Niger State. It was brought up by the late Bala Usman, a very Spartan gentleman. He has a 406 that I think one weather-beaten 406 that he uses around, probably also with a Marxist perspective. It's brocade, it's not as sharp as. I don't want to look indirect.
That's one in the medium. Gentlemen, we would like to thank you immensely this morning for your contributions on Good Morning Nigeria. For today, first of all, we'd like to begin with distinguished Senator Sabi Abdullahi, Chairman Senate Committee on Media and Publicity. That's until Saturday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
pleasure.
for coming. And Honorable Abdul Razak Namdas, the Chairman, House Committee on Media and Publicity. It's been wonderful hosting you this morning on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you, sir.
And not forgetting our friend, Professor Maxwell Gidado, Professor of Constitutional Law from the Nasarawa State University. It's been wonderful talking to you this morning.
Leonard Senior
Pleasure.
Advocate.
Leonard Senior. Lawyers are always okay. Senior Advocate of Nigeria. All right, and again, of course, we have our own man here. Okay, Pierre. He's an analyst and, of course, the ED, that's the Executive Director of Order Paper Nigeria. Okay, it's been wonderful.
Senior Advocate of Order.
Okay, it's on that note, we'd like to thank you for tuning in to Good Morning Nigeria. We are back on Monday, same time, that's 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do enjoy the rest of your day and have a lovely weekend. And don't forget, next week, of course, Wednesday, June 12, will be the premier Democracy Day that the country will be observing. My name is Kingsley Usadolo.
And I'm Kirian Umar. Have a wonderful weekend.